Hello, welcome to Online for Authors. Today I'm chatting with Kim Sloan, author of Memoirs from the Frontline. Welcome, Kim.
Hello. Hello.
I'm so happy to have you with us. Before we really dive into this book, which there's a lot to really talk about in here, right?
Yeah.
But before we get into it, what are readers going to find when they open up the cover of this memoir?
They are going to find an emotional roller coaster from a frontline ICU nurse. I mean, that's
during COVID.
correct.
Right?
Correct.
During COVID.
And in a hotspot. Like
right.
We got slammed at the beginning. So it is very much a emotional roller coaster.
It was very much an emotional roller coaster. And I think one of the things that struck me that I noticed the most was that everybody was experiencing COVID, this pandemic, in different ways.
Correct.
As an ICU nurse in a hotspot, you saw something very different than, say, what I saw on the coast of North Carolina, versus what you had relatives in Ohio see, versus
Correct.
And because of that, there were a lot of people who were saying to you, what you're seeing isn't real.
Correct.
And I've noticed that about people, that we have this tendency to say, well, because my experience is different than your experience, then you are obviously wrong.
Correct.
Instead of being able to say, what I'm experiencing is what I'm experiencing. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did that kind of play out during this whole pandemic issue?
So in the beginning, when we were seeing death after death that's all we saw. We didn't see anybody survive until probably the end of April, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the only way they left the ICU was in a body bag. And when you see that day in and day out, and then you have family members that are saying, well, it's not really that bad. We felt like we were getting slapped in the face. Like, why are you not taking our word? We are literally here.
Right.
This is what we're doing.
Right.
But yet you're listening to the news and the newscasters who were not living what we were living. It was the anger, the frustration. Looking back, I understand why they didn't believe it was that bad, because they weren't seeing it.
Right.
In the
moment. Well, and in your perspective, of course, you were in an ICU unit. So
Correct.
let's that's where you were. So by the time you saw someone with COVID, they were bad.
Extremely.
These were not the people who could recover at home.
Correct.
Whereas those people who weren't in an ICU, who were, on the coast of North Carolina, only ever heard of the people who were at home and lost their sense of smell and felt gross for 2 or 3 days, and they were fine. And so there were two very different scenarios happening.
Correct.
One of the things that you pointed out was the problem was that you could not point to people and say, if you get COVID, you'll be fine. And if you get COVID, you won't.
Yeah. It was playing Russian roulette. I mean, someone was literally playing Russian roulette with someone else's life.
Yeah.
And that's why we were getting so angry, because how do you know you're not going to infect the next person and they're going to die? How do you know that? You don't know that.
Well, and how do you know that you're not going to be the next person to die?
Correct.
Right? Or like, how do you know? And it was difficult. I can say, for someone that was on my side of seeing COVID, that it was difficult because the information that we were getting was coming from sometimes people like you who are telling us about this horrible devastation. And then the very next thing that you would hear is there's nobody even in the ICU.
Yeah.
And you're like, which is it?
Yeah. And that's what was crazy, because like we were getting slammed in southern Georgia.
Right.
But the hospitals in North Carolina might not have gotten hit yet.
Right.
So you might not have had, the ICUs weren't full. But
Right.
then 6 months later,
maybe ours were really full.
You might have gotten hit. And
Right.
that's where COVID was so scary, because you did not have any idea when it was going to affect you personally.
Right.
And,
Right.
speaking to the people that were recovering, I don't know how many times we had people say, well, why aren't you giving them the Plaquenil? Why aren't you giving them the remdesivir? Why aren't you doing this? And we're like, by the time they get to us,
It's
those
too late.
you can just throw them at them. That's
Right.
as much effect as they're doing.
Right.
So, yes, those medicines were working on those that were like on the med surg unit or, in the ER. Even the convalescent plasma, that was working great for people like in the ER that weren't critical yet.
Right. At the point, one of the things that I noted from, especially in the beginning, was that once someone hit the ICU, the chances of recovery were slim.
Exactly. Yeah.
That not everyone hit ICU. And I don't think at any time you were ever trying to tell people that everyone's going to get sick and die. But
Correct.
what you were saying is if you get sick enough to end up where I am, the likelihood that you go home is pretty slim.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And I think that's the thing that was really hard is I have a distant family connection of someone who is also a nurse who was in New York City at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that she was telling versus what I was seeing, and it was like, it's a total disconnect. Yeah. Not that I ever disbelieved her. I knew what she was experiencing was real, but I thought, how is it that COVID is doing what it's doing there? And here, it doesn't even seem to be here. Like I know it was, it's not that it wasn't in North Carolina. I mean, I knew people that had it, but it just didn't seem to be doing the same thing. And I think that for people who weren't in the medical field seeing, and not even just the medical field, but the medical field in an ICU unit, because I think that's another thing that you pointed out is that you had medical people telling you that what you were seeing wasn't true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost quite a few friends. Now, were they really actually friends? I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah.
I had a nurse practitioner who I used to work with side by side in the ER years ago before she became a nurse practitioner. She told me that COVID wasn't that bad. And I'm like, are you seeing the COVID patients? She said, well, yeah, I see them every day. Do you see them in person? Well, no, all my care is on Zoom. There's not a connection here.
Right. If they're capable of doing a Zoom call with you, they're not the patients I'm seeing.
Right.
Because your patients couldn't have done Zoom with you.
Oh, my patients were sedated, intubated, and were not there at all. They were barely clinging to life. So, no, you don't have an opinion to me then if you're not actually in the ICU seeing these patients.
What do you think could have been done differently to help people have a better understanding of what was going on?
I think during a pandemic like we had, I think HIPAA laws should have been thrown out the door.
Okay.
Because in a war zone, the media can go in, the media can film anything that they need to film.
So
they can talk to whoever they can talk.
Right.
But with the hospital, you have HIPAA laws.
Right.
And I 100% think that if the people could have actually followed an ICU nurse through the day or, seen more than what they were seeing, if the news coverage would have actually focused on the sickest of the sickest But instead, they focused on the recovery. They focused on, you have a 75% more chance of recovering from this. Well, what about the 25%? Let's help prevent more, because we're tired. We were so tired of constantly seeing death after death. And that, I think that was the hardest part. I think I really 100%, if it's a worldwide pandemic, HIPAA should be out the door.
You should be allowed to come in and do some filming and see what was
Yep.
actually,
and show the people, this is why we're asking you to wear the mask. But also, there was no education on how the scientific development happens. Like,
right.
You know, yes, we were told to wear a mask, and then they said, well, you don't have to wear a mask. Then they said you do have to wear a mask.
Then they said you had to wear 2 masks, and then they said, you know, and everybody's like, you know,
you don't know what you're doing. Well, you do, because that's how the scientific method works. That's, you know, you try it, doesn't work, let's try something different. We were constantly changing our protocols in the ICU. I mean, it wasn't like we treated the COVID patients exactly the same from the very beginning. There was changes along the way. That's just how scientific method works.
Right. I think that for people that didn't understand what was going on, and we weren't seeing the worst of the worst, every day was a new change as to what we were supposed to be doing at home. And it was like, do you people even know what you're doing?
Correct.
That's what it felt. It very much felt like what are we, do you even know what this is? And the truth is no, for a long time, we did not know what COVID really was.
Nope. When we got hit, we weren't even wearing masks in the hospital when we got hit. So we had no idea. We were treating them as pneumonia patients initially. Exactly. But then they were crashing so fast. And then we were getting information from China. We were getting information from Italy. And the doctors were researching what the New York doctors were doing. And it was, so we were learning as we went.
Right.
We had a doctor get really, really sick. And so all of us had to get tested because we weren't wearing masks. So then we started wearing masks, you know, within the unit. So it's just
one of the things you also brought up was you have what you call PPE, which is personal protective
equipment.
I couldn't remember what the E was. Okay. PPE, which is for those of you that don't know, I mean, it's like all the stuff that they put on, and it makes them almost look like, you know, a sci-fi movie. You know, they've got the gowns and the helmets and the masks and the clear thing over their face and all of the stuff. And that way, when they go in, they're not able to get the germs on their person. And then when they leave, they can pull all of that off.
Correct.
And then, right. Except that you didn't have enough PPE.
Correct. So we wore the same gown multiple days in a row. We would just put our name on it. We wore the same mask multiple days in a row, as long as we could. We were lucky. That's why John and I stayed so long, because we knew that we had the masks. We knew that we had, even though we had to wear it multiple days, we weren't limited on, you know, we never had to go without a mask. We never, I would have been fine going without the gowns if I had to, but I did not want to go without an N95.
Absolutely.
That was scary.
Eventually, according to your memoir, you got COVID.
We did not get COVID until January of 22.
Yes.
Which is impressive.
It really is impressive.
As close that we were in this. But I'll tell you, we wore masks everywhere. Everywhere.
Right.
Until then.
So in January of 22, you got COVID. I'm curious, were you terrified?
I was.
Yeah.
I was angry because I got it from family.
Yeah.
In my own home.
Yeah.
Because I chose to go without a mask.
Yeah.
If I would have wore a mask,
you might not have gotten it.
I might not have gotten it.
Yeah.
I was angry. I was frustrated. I was so sick.
Yeah.
And I know 100%, and I never tried to push anything in my book, and I'm not pushing it now. But I 100% think that if I would not have been vaccinated, I would have ended up in the hospital when I got it because I was so sick.
So sick. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
So
on that same note, my husband, who is a longtime smoker, got COVID the same time as me, and he had a fever for 2 days. And that's it.
right. And it is really interesting. My
And I'm not a
husband
smoker.
right. My husband and I both got COVID, but not until January of 23.
Nice.
So how we managed that. And I was sick. I had a fever of 105.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrible. And
Yep.
he has cancer. He's on chemo. And he was sick for a day and a half.
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
Like,
I mean, that just proves
right,
the point.
Which doesn't make any sense. He
Right.
should have definitely been sicker than me.
Right.
This should have been something. In fact, his doctors were a little concerned, and they put us both on Paxlovid.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. And, so we had metal mouth and the whole yuck. And they gave it to him because of him being on chemo. They gave it to me because I was his caregiver, and they knew that I needed to be able to help him. I couldn't get sick. But I was way sicker than he was.
Yeah.
And
it's crazy.
That it makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah, because like when you get the flu, you're going to be down for a few days, usually. Right. When you get a common cold, you're going to be down. You get a sinus infection, you can expect what you're going to get.
Right.
With COVID, you don't know what you're going to get.
No,
still,
you really don't.
Even 4 years later.
Today.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And some people handle it so easily, and it's nothing more than a cold.
Right. Right.
And other people, and not only that, but I've noticed some people seem to catch it easier.
Yeah.
So for instance, I have a daughter who she's been vaccinated. She's a stay-at-home mom. She homeschools her kids. So her kids aren't even out in the general, snotty-nosed population of a classroom, right? And she's had COVID 4 times.
Wow.
Now she masks. She's always done what she was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And she's had it 4 times. However, she hardly gets sick. She has what she says feels like an incredibly bad cold. Like the worst cold she's ever had, but it's still in the realm of having a bad cold.
Yeah.
So for a couple of days, she feels kind of puny and a little feverish. And by a little, I mean a little, and she just kind of feels generally
Yeah.
And then she's fine.
Yeah.
And she seems to catch it over and over. And then there are other people who get, I have 105 fever and I felt way worse than a little cold. Right. And then there are other people who end up in the ICU.
Right. Right. We just had a gentleman in his early 40s. I just had a patient last week that he had COVID so bad that he was on a rotoprone bed, which is one of those that flips you from your belly to your back and forth. And he had to be transferred to a higher level of care to get further treatment. I don't know that he's going to make it.
And so that's today.
Yeah.
4 years later.
Last week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's COVID.
Yeah. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you is what does COVID look like now?
I mean, it's not as severe. We don't see as many that are in the ICU, very rarely. And this guy a lot of PTSD came back when I had to go into his room and take care of him. But even on the floor, we're not seeing as many that we've seen in the past. So now we treat COVID pretty much like the flu. It's not, when I hear that I have a COVID patient, I don't freak out like I did at the beginning. Right. But still, when I saw my dude had to be put on a rotoprone bed, I'm like, oh, memories.
Yeah, please, I don't want to see this coming again. Right.
Yeah.
I know that your husband played a huge role in your life during that period of time, because he is also a traveling nurse who was right there with you in the trenches. And so he saw it all. Let's talk a little bit about, his role in helping you maintain what you were able to maintain.
I think the biggest part is we were experienced the nightmare together.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was at work and came home and had to talk to him about it because he didn't work in a hospital or something.
Right.
But we actually were there. So we were there. We were working pretty much, with the same. He was more on the surgical ICU and I was on the medical ICU at the time. But it didn't matter. We were all dealing with COVID patients. So when he would hear a code up on my floor, or I would hear a code on his floor, I'm like, is that John's patient? Or he would, is that Kim's patient? But then when we were driving home from work, we could talk about our day. Or I know there was a couple times where I had a really bad situation where I lost a patient and I was like completely
devastated,
non-consolable at the time. The other nurses would call down to his floor and say, John, you need to come up here. So we were able to comfort each other. We were able to cry together. We were able to talk about things together. We were able to be frustrated together. We were able to be angry together. We were able to have happy tears together. I could not have survived without him.
Yeah.
I would not have survived.
So many of the things that happened, especially as people were telling you you're not experiencing what you're experiencing, or you're not telling the truth, or other things, very much the gaslighting type of thing. At least you had someone else in your life that you loved who knew what you knew, so that you could at least say, okay, it's not what they're saying is not true. I know it because I have someone else right here by my side that's experiencing it too, which keeps you a little bit sane, knowing that someone else knows and believes what you're going through.
Yep. Keeps you grounded, keeps you, I know I'm not crazy. I know what we went through. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
I know it happened. And, and even when I was writing the book, there would be times where I read to him every chapter.
Right.
So I would read it to him and he's like, well, what about this? You forgot to write about this. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot
that piece.
So I could add in, like the baby monitors. That was a big thing. When we had to open up that extra ICU, we couldn't see the patients. So
because you didn't have the windows.
Correct. So
because you weren't in an actual unit. Right.
So the hospital ended up buying baby monitors. So we would be able to see our patient and see our drips. So we knew, if they were beeping or if the patient was, uncomfortable or whatever.
Right.
So, I forgot to write about that, but that's an important aspect of what we were dealing with. It's something little, but that was a big deal. Yes. For 4 days we went without those baby monitors. So you couldn't see anything.
Right. And the difference in having an ICU unit set up from the beginning as an ICU versus trying to create one.
Right.
There's a big difference. I know my husband has been on an ICU unit and I know that they look a lot different from a regular room. Right. So
big difference.
Exactly. I loved the fact that despite COVID, you and your husband continued to live. You still found ways to do things. During the summer of 2020, my husband and I rode a tandem bicycle across the United States.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And we were told by a lot of people, you shouldn't do it because of COVID. And we decided that we were going to be outdoors, mostly alone. To me, alone and outside seemed like a better option than a lot of things that we could do. We had our masks. We carried hand sanitizer with us everywhere we went. I think that by the time the trip was over, my blood was probably 50% hand sanitizer at that point.
Yep.
But and whenever we had to go into like a store or anything like that, we masked. We did everything we were supposed to do, and we made it all the way across without getting COVID. And so when I found that you too said, okay, we can live, we just have to live differently, I really loved that. I'm curious though, you saw so much devastation. I think if I had seen what you had seen, I would have been hiding in a closet, afraid to come out. How did you manage to say living is what we still need to do?
I think I saw too many people that were afraid and not wanting to still live. That I wanted to show them you can still live. You just have to live safely.
Right.
And I didn't want to see people shut up in their houses. Because I think that can be more devastating. Not to like bring it, I don't know. Betty White's death really affected my thought process on this because she stopped going out before she died.
Yeah.
Because of COVID. She stopped, visiting with people. She stopped doing what she loved to do. And it just makes you wonder, anybody who did that, did they stop living and then they really stopped living?
Yeah. No, I understand.
To show that you could actually still live. You just have to do it safely. You
just have to find new ways to do it.
Right. And that was one of the arguments with that nurse practitioner. She was arguing with me that opening the beaches in Florida was okay. I'm like, I don't see how this is okay. Well, they're outside, Kim. It's safe. But they're in big groups.
Right. There's a difference. There's a difference between being outdoors in a group. You're still getting sneezed upon and spit upon, and the air is it's the group idea. You're safer in a group outdoors than indoors, but you're still in a group. Right.
And like the church in Oregon.
Yeah.
I talked about that in there. They were suing the state because they were wanting to shut down the churches. Well, they were arguing that they were having church outside, but then 75% of the congregation ended up with COVID.
Right.
Well, you were outside, but you were outside in a group.
In a tight group, as opposed to if you had. So the beaches in North Carolina opened up, but they had very strict rules. You weren't allowed to be in groups.
Mm-hmm.
You could only be with your family. You had to set your things far apart from other people's things.
Right.
They just had these they stopped all alcohol on the beach and several other things that are often an indication of people wanting to do group events. Right. All of those things were taken away. But even so, when my husband and I came, so we ended up back here in October of 2020, and I was more afraid of getting COVID here than I had been the whole way across the United States. Now, across the United States, we were up in the northern states. So we went through Montana, and we went through Montana before they had their outbreak. We were in like North Dakota. These areas were not hit very hard, at least at that time. It had not really gotten there, and we were outdoors alone.
Right.
And even in the campgrounds, the only time that we ever felt nervous was the campground bathrooms.
Oh, yeah.
Those were a little nerve-wracking. And, I would wear my mask, right up to the shower. And then, as soon as the shower's over, get your mask back on. There was a little bit of nerve there. But generally, I felt safer than here at the beach, because here at the beach, people were coming to visit. And vacationers have a very different attitude than people who are not on vacation. They're on vacation. They didn't want to wear their masks in the grocery store.
Yep.
They didn't want to follow the one-way signs. They didn't want to do all those things because they're on vacation.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my husband, we're going to get it here.
Yeah. Yeah. We felt safer in Georgia.
Yeah.
In the thick of it than we did when we went home to Ohio.
Right.
Even when we were in Las Vegas for our assignment in 21, the fall of 21, we felt safer in Las Vegas walking down Fremont Street than we did when we come home to Ohio.
Right. Right. And it has a lot to do with what are people's attitudes and, who's following rules and et cetera. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. When people read this book, other than just getting a good look at what you went through, what do you hope that they take away from this?
I hope that they take away that ICU nurses went through a mental health roller coaster, and I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago.
Right.
And there's a reason. And I think other nurses that have gone through what we've went through are not the same people. And many of our friends, I have one friend in particular that's really no longer a friend. She put her distance because I'm not that same person.
Right.
And I think people really need to understand that it changed a lot of people. It changed a lot of relationships, but COVID happened. It happened in different states. It happened in different ways. It affected people in different ways. And it wasn't just in New York City.
Right.
It was clear across the country. And I think people need to learn how to wash their hands. And, if you're sick, be mindful of other people.
Right. Right. I've noticed in general, at least for me, that I used to, if I had a cold, I just thought, well, I'll just, like stay away from people a little bit and I'd still go do life. And I'm much more likely now to say, I'm not feeling 100%. I don't think I'm going to go be with people today.
Yeah.
There's more of a concern of, I don't want to give someone something because we had to think about it so much more that and generally I've noticed that, for instance, I play bridge once a week with a group of ladies, and there's often someone who will call and say, I'm not going to be able to play today. I've gotten a sub. I'm not feeling 100%. Well, 4 years ago, that would have never happened.
Right.
You would have been playing cards and touching those cards and doing everything with, and they would have been sneezing the whole time and you wouldn't have worried about it.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like, I'm feeling a little off today. I don't think we're getting together. Yeah. So that is a difference, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. And, if you think about, I really like the comparison I put in the book about glitter and how a virus spreads. And, if you think about how glitter sticks to everything.
Yeah.
That's exactly how a virus is. So,
right.
I think that is one of the most important parts. One of the most important stories I have in that book is the glitter story, because we can prevent so many infections and illnesses if you just wash your hands. That is the number one answer when you take your nursing boards.
Right. Wash your hands.
Washing your hands. And that is one thing that even Florence Nightingale came up with.
Right.
Was washing your hands.
Just wash your hands. Wash your hands.
And that's a very important aspect of the book.
So too. I'm curious, you've now written a book. Do you have any intention of writing again now that you've done this?
So I have actually, this was my baby. This was it needed to go out. I think it's a very important historical book. I think I actually mailed it to the Library of Congress.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Fingers crossed. I really feel that it's a very important book for historical information pertaining to the pandemic.
Right.
But on the other side, it kind of got me into the mood. My husband and I have ridden the motorcycle in all 50 states.
Right.
And we I have now published an entire Billy Bob's Adventures children's book series. There's 11 books in the series. It teaches about all 50 states using reading, comprehension, history, and geography.
Oh, fun.
Yes, yes. And then there's a toddler book that teaches all 50 states using the alphabet 1 through 10 and all the colors. And then I just published my Thanksgiving book. I have 2 books in a holiday series now, Halloween and Thanksgiving. So,
oh, how fun.
So I am so my focus now.
Yeah. I love that it kind of like started a spark in you and made you realize that there's a little bit of an author in Kim Sloan.
Yeah, I love to teach. I've never been a teacher, but I've been a clinical instructor for nursing students. But I think it's so important for people to travel. And as a travel nurse, we've been very blessed. We're now in Oklahoma, working in Tulsa for a couple more weeks, and then we're move on someplace else. It's our 15th state to work in and our 21st assignment. And I think children should get that bug to travel. It's just, we live in an absolute gorgeous country, and too many people sit in their backyards and don't go anywhere.
And never see a thing. Right. I agree.
Right.
So, hey, everyone, if you want to continue this book conversation, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have the opportunity to win a digital copy of Kim's book, Memoirs from the Frontlines. So be sure to say something on the post that I put up. And Kim, I want to thank you so much for being with me today, for sharing this, for sharing your experiences, and for being that vulnerable. It was a very eye-opening book for me, and I really appreciated what you had to put out there for us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope it eye-opens a lot of people.
I think it will. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.